is really telling us. Apollo 11 worked, and no play makes Jack, Kubrick, a dull boy. If you think that I'm stretching things here, I would like to point out the patch that NASA had created to symbolize the Apollo program. There are other A's in the film also. The Overlook Hotel has several A's built into its construction when viewed from the outside. Stanley has used these A's before. Here is the cover of A Clockwork Orange, with Alex menacingly coming out of the A with his all-seeing eye cufflink. It is clear that the evidence presented in the film that Kubrick's wife, Shelley Duvall, had discovered that he, Stanley Kubrick, had made a secret deal with the manager of the Overlook, i.e. with the rulers of the USA. Shelley Duvall, i.e. Christiana Kubrick, also discovered that what she thought was one thing actually turned out to be another. What Mrs. Kubrick discovered was that instead of making a science fiction film called 2001: A Space Odyssey, her husband was really working to create the fake Apollo moon landings. At this point, the film gets really interesting. Frightened by this revelation, Wendy wants Jack, Stanley, to quit the project. Jack, Stanley, angrily replies, "That is so typical of you. I've made an agreement. I have obligations to my employers." Jack looks at her and says, "Do you have any idea what would happen to my future if I failed to live up to my responsibility?"
You concerned about me?
Of course I am.
Of course you are. Ever thought about my responsibilities?
Oh, Dick, what are you talking about?
Have you ever had a single moment's thought about my responsibilities? Have you ever thought for a single solitary moment about my responsibilities to my employers? Has it ever occurred to you that I have agreed to look after the Overlook Hotel until May the 1st? Does it matter to you at all that the owners have placed their complete confidence and trust in me, and that I have signed a letter of agreement, a contract, in which I have accepted that responsibility? Do you have the slightest idea what a moral and ethical principle is, do you? Has it ever occurred to you what would happen to my future if I were to fail to live up to my responsibilities? Has it ever occurred to you?
Danny uses his gift of The Shining to contact Dick Halloran in Florida, which I might add is where Apollo 11 was launched. Dick laboriously travels from Florida to Colorado.
Pardon me, miss. What time will we get to Denver?
We're due to arrive at 8:20, sir.
Thank you very much.
In King's novel, Jack has a red Volkswagen, but Kubrick changed it to a yellow Volkswagen in the film. When Halloran is driving to the Overlook in the snowstorm, he sees a red Volkswagen completely wrecked by a semi-truck. This is a cold-hearted message directly from Stanley Kubrick to Stephen King, that his vehicle, the novel The Shining, has been wrecked by Kubrick and replaced with Kubrick's version. I really have to wonder what Stephen King thought of Kubrick's film when he saw this scene, especially since he was probably the only one in the world who understood Stanley's message. In another abrupt break with the novel, Jack Torrance kills Halloran as soon as he arrives at the Overlook. So much for Halloran's psychic abilities. While I think this scene is very disturbing, and I doubt if I can ever prove this, but I think Stanley Kubrick is telling us something very definite with this alteration to the King novel. I believe that the naive side of him, represented by Danny, told someone that he, Kubrick, was faking the Apollo moon landings. He may have even told this person that he was faking the lunar landings for NASA while appearing to produce the film 2001: A Space Odyssey. Halloran is a representation of the person that Kubrick mistakenly revealed this most secret of all information. When Halloran and Danny have a conversation about The Shining, Halloran warns Danny to stay away from room 237. He says, "You ain't got no business going to room 237, so just stay out." As Halloran is the only person to warn Danny, Stanley, about room 237, the moon landing stage, Stanley went to this mysterious confidant and told him that he was right. Stanley should have stayed away from room 237, the moon landing stage. Because of that, Halloran, or the person who Stanley told, had to die. The secret must remain safe.
You're scared of room 237, ain't you?
No, I ain't.
Mr. Halloran, what is in room 237?
Nothing. There ain't nothing in room 237. But you ain't got no business going in there anyway. So stay out.
This also explains why Kubrick had to hide all of this crucial information inside the construct of the King novel. Kubrick wanted the story to get out, but he was also afraid for his life. Kubrick had to fake the making of the Stephen King novel so that he could reveal that he was involved in faking the moon landings. The truth is that The Shining is the story of how Stanley Kubrick cut a deal with the U.S. government to fake the Apollo moon landings. It is also the story of how Kubrick may have accidentally told someone what he had done and how that person had to be killed. The Shining is also the story of how faking the moon landings almost sacrificed his relationship with his wife. Finally, it is the story of how Stanley Kubrick barely escaped alive. The Shining is the story of how a part of Stanley Kubrick was killed by the agreement that he made with the U.S. government to become the caretaker of the project called A11 or Apollo 11. It is also the history of NASA. This explains why the previous caretaker was so pressured and stressed that he had to kill his twin daughters. Why? Because the previous NASA missions before Apollo were named Gemini. The Gemini are twins. This is why Kubrick switched the girls from just being sisters to being twins. At 1 hour and 55 minutes into the film, Jack wakes up in the pantry surrounded by boxes that say 39,000. Apollo 11 took off from launch pad 39. Other boxes say Golden Ray, which is what comes from Apollo, the sun god. Finally, we see Tang, the drink that went to the moon with the astronauts. And finally, the ending shot of The Shining has Jack at a 4th of July party in 1921. In his right hand, he is holding a secret note. There is also a gentleman behind Jack who is trying to stop him from showing us this secret note. What is in this secret note? You have just found out.
Under the Masonic moon, plans were made by the bankers in the back room. Get the president out of the way and hire Stanley Kubrick. Under the Masonic moon, under the Masonic moon, everyone hoped that the boys would come home soon. One more day and they'll drop from the plane and splash into the ocean. Under the Masonic moon, Von Braun and his conspirators got a free ride to the States. They turned Nazi into Nassau. They just couldn't wait. Under the Masonic moon, under the Masonic moon, plans were made by the bankers in the back room. The owl sees into the night, and the secret will never be